Marshal William Hayes had seen many difficult days in his 38 years, but nothing compared to losing his wife Sarah to fever 3 winters past. Now he walked the dusty streets of Cottonwood Creek with his 8-year-old son Jacob by his side, trying to be both father and mother to a boy who still asked for her at bedtime. William was a tall man, weathered by the Arizona sun, with kind eyes that had seen too much sorrow. His badge caught the afternoon light as he made his rounds, one hand resting protectively on Jacob's shoulder. The boy had his mother's gentle nature, and William was determined to keep that softness alive in him, even in this hard land. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. William was walking past the town square when he noticed a crowd gathering near the old auction platform. His stomach turned. He knew what this was. A woman in fine clothes, too fine for Cottonwood Creek, stood beside a young girl, speaking loudly to the assembled men. "Strong worker, this one," the woman was saying, her voice sharp and cold. 18 years old. Can cook, clean, mend. I'm asking a fair price. William felt Jacob's hand slip into his. "Papa, what's happening?" The girl on the platform stood with her head down, long brown hair falling across her face. She wore a simple tan dress, dusty and worn. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and even from a distance, William could see she was trembling. There was something achingly vulnerable about her posture, the way she seemed to be trying to disappear into herself. The woman beside her wore a blue jacket over a brown skirt, her gray hair pulled back in a severe style. William recognized the look of cruelty in her pinched expression. He'd seen it before, in people who viewed others as property rather than souls. "That's her stepmother," someone whispered nearby. "Parents died last year. Woman's been working the girl to the bone ever since, and now she's selling her off. Says she can't afford to feed her anymore." William's jaw tightened. He thought of Sarah, of how she'd always said that kindness was the only currency that mattered in this world. He thought of Jacob, and what kind of man he'd grow up to be if he watched this happen and his father did nothing. "I'll take her," William said, his voice carrying across the square. The crowd parted as he walked forward. The stepmother's eyes gleamed with greed. "Marshal Hayes! Didn't expect a lawman to—" "How much?" William interrupted. They settled on a sum that would leave William's savings considerably lighter. He counted out the bills with steady hands, refusing to meet the eyes of the men who'd also been bidding. When the transaction was complete, he turned to the girl. She finally looked up, and William saw eyes full of fear and confusion. She was younger than he'd realized, barely more than a child herself, with delicate features and an expression that spoke of too many disappointments. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma Rose." "I'm William. This is my son, Jacob." He gestured to the boy, who waved shyly. "You'll come home with us now. You'll have your own room and you'll be safe. That's my promise to you." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly, as if she'd learned long ago that crying changed nothing. The walk back to William's house was quiet. Jacob chattered nervously, trying to fill the silence, telling Emma about their chickens and the cat that lived in the barn. William noticed how Emma walked, carefully, as if she was used to avoiding notice. She carried nothing with her, no bag or belongings. The stepmother hadn't even allowed her that. The house William shared with Jacob was modest but clean. Sarah's touches were still everywhere. The curtains she'd sewn, the garden she'd planted, the warmth she'd built into these walls. William had tried to maintain it all, for Jacob's sake and for his own. "This will be your room," William said, opening the door to what had been a storage space. "It's small, but it's private. I'll bring in a proper bed tomorrow. For tonight there's a cot and clean blankets." Emma stood in the doorway, staring at the simple space as if it were a palace. "This is mine?" "It's yours," William confirmed. "The door has a lock. You're safe here, Emma. I want you to understand that." "You're not— This isn't—" He struggled to find the right words. "What happened today was wrong, but you're not a servant in this house. You're under my protection, and that means something." That first evening, Emma moved through the house like a ghost, trying to be invisible. She insisted on cooking dinner, and William didn't have the heart to refuse. Seeing how much she needed to feel useful, she made a simple stew, but it was the best meal they'd had in months. Jacob talked throughout dinner, his childish chatter, gradually drawing small smiles from Emma. William watched quietly, seeing how she softened around his son, how her shoulders slowly lowered from their defensive hunch. The weeks that followed established a gentle rhythm. Emma proved to be exactly what she'd been advertised as: capable, hardworking, efficient. But William noticed other things too. The way she flinched at sudden movements, how she ate quickly as if the food might be taken away, the nightmares that sometimes woke her, her cries muffled through the thin walls. He gave her space and time, asking nothing beyond basic courtesy. He paid her a small wage from his marshal's salary, insisting despite her protests. "Everyone who works deserves compensation," he told her firmly. "That's not charity. That's justice." Slowly, carefully, Emma began to bloom. Color returned to her cheeks. She started speaking without being spoken to first. She laughed, actually laughed, at one of Jacob's silly jokes, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. William found himself watching her more than he should. Not in any improper way, but with a growing awareness that this young woman had brought something back to his house that had been missing. Not a replacement for Sarah. Nothing could ever replace his wife, but something new. A different kind of light. One evening, about 2 months after Emma had arrived, William came home to find her teaching Jacob to read from one of Sarah's old books. They sat together on the porch, Emma's finger tracing the words, Jacob's small voice sounding them out. The late sun caught in Emma's hair, and she was smiling, truly smiling, without fear or hesitation. William's heart did something strange in his chest. He stood there, hidden by the shadows of the house, and admitted to himself what he'd been denying for weeks. He was falling in love with her. The thought terrified him. She was so young, barely older than a girl. She'd been through trauma he could only imagine. The power difference between them was enormous. He'd literally bought her freedom. Any feeling she might develop could be confused with gratitude or obligation. It would be wrong. It would be taking advantage. So William did what he thought was right. He pushed his feelings down and locked them away. But Emma, it seemed, had her own ideas. She started finding excuses to be near him, bringing him coffee while he worked, sitting beside him on the porch after Jacob went to bed, asking his advice on small matters, her eyes lingering on his face. One evening, as autumn painted the world in gold and amber, Emma sat beside William as he mended a fence rail. Jacob was playing with the barn cat nearby.
"William?"
Emma said softly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you do it? That day in town? Why did you—" She struggled with the words. "Why did you buy me?" William set down his tools and looked at her directly. "Because it was wrong. Because my wife taught me that we're measured by what we do when no one's watching. Because I have a son, and I want him to grow up knowing that we protect people who can't protect themselves," he paused. "And because when I looked at you standing there, so scared and alone, all I could think was that you deserved better. Everyone deserves better than that." Emma's eyes shimmered. "I think about that day all the time. How different my life would be if you hadn't been there. You don't owe me anything for it, Emma. I hope you know that." "That's not—" She looked down at her hands. "It's not about owing. It's about—" "William, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You and Jacob, you've given me a home. A real home. And I—" She took a breath. "I've developed feelings for you. Real feelings. Not gratitude or obligation. Something deeper." William's heart raced, but his mind warned caution. "Emma, you're very young." "I'm 18. Almost 19 now. That's still very young. And given how we met, how could you be sure what you're feeling isn't—" "Don't," she said with sudden strength. "Don't diminish what I feel. I know my own heart, William. I've known cruelty and kindness both. I know the difference between being grateful and being in love." She met his eyes. "I'm in love with you. I have been for weeks now." William couldn't speak. He wanted to tell her all the reasons this was complicated, impossible. But he also wanted to be honest with her, as she'd been honest with him. "I feel it too," he admitted quietly. "But Emma, I'm nearly 20 years older than you. I'm a widower with a child. You could have a whole different life. I don't want a different life. I want this one, with you and Jacob, if—" She faltered slightly. "If you'll have me." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Jacob's laughter rang out as he chased the cat. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of rose and gold. William thought of Sarah and what she would say. He could almost hear her voice. Love isn't something you find once and then never again. Love is a gift you accept when it's offered, if you're wise enough to recognize it. I'd be honored, William said finally, if you'd consider courting. Properly, I mean, not rushing into anything, but seeing if this feeling between us is real and lasting. Emma's smile was like dawn breaking. I'd like that very much. They courted for 6 months, doing things properly under the watchful eyes of the town. William introduced Emma to society as his ward first, then his intended. There were whispers, of course, there always were in small towns. But most people saw what William saw. A young woman who'd been given a second chance, and a lonely man who'd found unexpected joy. Jacob was thrilled. He'd been calling Emma Mama Emma for months already, and now he could do so officially. They married the following spring, in the small church where William had buried Sarah 3 years earlier. Emma wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself. William stood beside her, feeling older than his years, but younger than he had in a long time. The pastor, who'd known William since boyhood, spoke about second chances and unexpected blessings, about how love comes in different forms and different seasons, about how the human heart, bruised and battered as it might be, has an infinite capacity for healing. As William slipped the ring onto Emma's finger, he looked into her eyes and saw his future, not a replacement for what he'd lost, but something new, something precious in its own right. Emma looked back at him with absolute certainty. This young woman who'd found courage he was only beginning to understand. She'd survived cruelty, embraced kindness, and chosen love even when love seemed impossible. I promise, William said softly, as they stood together before God and the gathered community, to honor you, protect you, and love you for all my days. And I promise, Emma replied, her voice clear and strong, to be your partner, your friend, and your love for all of mine. They kissed, sealing vows that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with choice. Outside the church, Cottonwood Creek bathed in spring sunshine. Jacob ran ahead, laughing, already planning where they'd plant flowers around the house. Emma slipped her hand into William's and he squeezed it gently. Are you happy? He asked. More than I ever thought possible, she answered honestly. You saved me, William. Not just that day in the square, but every day since. No, William said, with the wisdom of a man who'd learned that love is always mutual, always reciprocal. We saved each other. And as they walked home together, Marshall, bride, and boy, anyone watching would have seen what William had known from the start. That kindness is never wasted, that compassion changes lives, and that love, when it comes, should always be welcomed. No matter how unexpected its arrival,